Hello and welcome to this Wilcom Live webinar Embroidery Studio e4.5. My name is Brendan Prasner and I'm the Chief Product Officer here at Wilcom. Now before we get started, we'd just like to wish everyone well during these incredibly difficult times. No doubt your business is facing challenges like it's never faced before. And we hope that webinars or sessions like this will help equip you with new ideas or new concepts that you can invest into your business once you guys get up and running and hopefully bounce back a lot quicker. So again, we wish you all the best, and if there's anything we can do, please reach out to us. So as always, we want to make sure you get the most out of this webinar session. So we have some tips for you. First of all, we recommend turning off your phone to avoid any distractions during the session. We also recommend you close other windows and browsers. And if you do have a question as you go along, feel free to ask it in the question panel on the right of your screen. And our team are on hand to answer them as we go along. So what's on in today's session? Well, in today's webinar, we'd like to focus on some of the key improvements to Embroidery Studio e4.5. They include maze fill, Reef Photo Stitch, hand stitch effect, plus the all-new Embroidery Connect device, and we want to talk to you about the design library plus the job order feature. We have a special preview of two brand new features we have coming up at Wilcom, and they are our new beading device support plus the new complex text support. Now to get us started, I'd like to demonstrate a new fill type we've introduced to Embroidery Studio e4.5, and it's called maze fill. Now what's great about maze fill is it allows you to create pretty intricate filled pattern designs like you see here in a matter of seconds. And what's really great about this particular design, if I hide my stitches, is the whole design is actually one object. It's just a giant complex fill object that happens to have a hole in here because I digitized it around and I left a gap here and then digitized out the side here and around here. And instead of filling it with plain old tatami or satin or some other thick fill type, I've filled it with our brand new stitch type over here called maze fill. And maze fill lets you set a spacing, a length, and a smooth setting as well. And also whether you want the spiral pattern to go in either a counterclockwise or a clockwise direction. And again, this is just one object. And what that means is if I do it in a slow redraw, is there's no trims. It does the whole entire design using a run style stitch method without stopping once, without trimming, without lifting that needle, going through doing the entire design. And you can see as it's creating that design, it's building a really consistent spacing, even though you can't fit a consistent spacing throughout this entire object because there's different thicknesses and different sizes, but the computer works it out really cleverly, so it creates that visually almost consistent, perfect spacing. Now this method is commonly used in fashion style design work, and it is great for large fill areas where you don't want to put in a lot of stitches. But it can also be used for classic logo style work as well, as you can see with this sample design that I've got. Now this is a back of a jacket design, but instead of filling it with boring old tatami, we filled it with maze fill for this cityscape area up the top here, and just an open tatami fill down the bottom for the word London. And what I'd now like to do is show you how I built this design using this new maze fill stitch type effect. So I start up a new window, and I'm first of all going to click over to my CorelDRAW graphics mode. Now that I'm in Corel, I'm going to start off by importing some clip art or graphics that I've already created. So I'll go File, Import, and I'll browse to my folder, and I'll select my London cityscape. Now this could be some vector clip art that you purchased or created yourself. In this case, I've grabbed a whole bunch of different silhouette images and merged them together and built this solid single shape vector cityscape outline of London. And what I'm going to do is create my text on screen. So type the word London. And that font style I'm after, that classic I Love New York font, which is that Cooper Black. And because I want it to sew without trims, as little trims as possible, I'm going to use my lettering kerning tool and just bring in that word London, so each character is slightly overlapping a little bit, so there's no kind of gaps. You can sew all that as one giant object. And I'll just align that to the width of my silhouette background, which is about there. Now, at the moment it's still lettering, and each one of these are separate lettering objects. So I'm going to go up to Object and break it apart, and that makes each individual object be a separate object to start with. Now that they're separate objects, I'm going to select them, again go to Object and convert it to a curve, so it's no longer lettering, but they're just vectors that look like letters, but again they're separate individual objects. My last step is to select those individual objects and click the World tool, so now it's one large object, just like a complex fill with holes in the middle. Now I want to kind of cut it out and not have this background behind here, but I also don't want my background to run directly into the lettering. I want a bit of a gap here. So to do that, I'm going to use Corel's contour feature. So I select my object, I come over to the left side here, and I choose contour, and it's very similar to the offset tool we have in EmbroideryStudio. I can choose to make it be offset on the outside and make one offset and make it 2.5 mil will be enough. I'll get rid of that 4, and just so we can see it, I'll make it have a white background, so we can see that's the actual offset it's created, which is a nice gap, 2.5 mil. Now I don't actually want that offset object there. I want it to cut away this background here. So with my offset object selected, I go up to Object and I break apart. It will now separate it as its own separate object. And then with that selected, I select the Shift key and the background silhouette. So I've got both objects selected, my offset white one and my red silhouette pattern. And this time, instead of world, I choose flatten. And it basically uses this offset as a stamp. Boom. And if I make that yellow so we can still see my offset, there it is there, but I've used it as a stamp, and it's now cut away this vector background in here, so you can see it's no longer there, which is exactly what I want. So I can get rid of my yellow offset, I no longer need that. And if I look at my London, well, you know what, I don't really want the red in here, because that's just silly, it's going to create a whole lot of trims. So I use my reshape tool, and I'll just select these ones and delete that, delete that, delete that, delete that little one there, and this one, and my final one can be gone. So what I've got in the end is two objects. I've got my silhouette in the background here, which is one object, and I've got my London here, which is another object. Both single objects to be able to be sewn as one shape without any trims, which is perfect. Now that my artwork is done, I select all that in Corel Draw mode and I click the Convert Graphics to Embroidery. This does the hard work for you. My Corel Draw vectors have now been converted to embroidery. And if you look down at the stitch count, it's created a 20,259 stitch design. There's a lot of stitches in that design. If that was the back of a jacket, it's going to be pretty thick. It'll be pretty much a mess on a t-shirt. It's going to cause a lot of problems, right? I'm going to probably have movement, I have a lot of warping effect, and it's just a lot of time on the machine. Well, that's where these new open fills are really useful. Let's start off with the top red section here. It's come in as plain old tatami because it was a large fill shape, but now I can select my brand new maze fill stitch type, and it will go through and convert it to maze fill. It's used the default 4 mil spacing, so I can bring that down to, let's say, 1 millimeter. And I can also change other settings such as my stitch length. It's currently 2.5 mil, which is pretty okay. And I can also change my smoothing, but you know what? It's on low and it's done a really good job. I don't need to increase the accuracy of that turning points or anything. And I can make it be counterclockwise or clockwise direction. And again, if I slow redraw this, it is going through and sewing this entire maze fill object as one object. Again, creating a nice even spacing for that run style stitch fill. and finishing it off again without a single trim. Now it's going through doing the grey part down below. Now we've gone from 20,000 and we're now down to 12,000 stitches, so we're already saving a lot. But I'm not finishing there. I'm just going to change out my London. So I select my London, I take that default 0.4 up to, let's say, about a 2 mil spacing. With an open spacing, I don't need underlay, so I can turn off my underlay. And I can then use the trapunto feature to force all my travel runs to be on the outside of my design. And when I look at it, there's some outlines here because it's traveling, but there's no outlines on here, so it looks a little bit inconsistent. There's a couple of gaps here. So I'm going to select that London object, click on my outline and offset tool. I'm going to check only to do an outline and not do a offset, and I'll change it to use that same gray color, number 17, and click OK. And it's now doing a perfect outline around my entire London shape. And I've gone again from 20 down to 12, and now 12 down to just 5,500 stitches. So that's maze fill. It's a new element for our designing level of our software, and again it lets you take a really thick fill shape object and turn it into this nice open stitch and a very visually impressive looking design as well. The next feature I'd like to talk about is our Reef Photo Stitch. Now, Reef Photo Stitch is a new photo stitch method along with our existing Photo Flash and Color Photo Stitch. Now, what's unique about Reef Photo Stitch, as hopefully you can see by this example. First of all, the stitching effect it creates has that coral reef type effect, hence the name Reef Photo Stitch. Now, it also creates the photo in one color and with one single thread. That means in this example here, it actually does the entire design. If I take off my outlines, the entire design with one needle in one color and never trimming. Now, just like maze fill that you saw before, it also doesn't overlap any stitches, and that gives a really soft, smooth and open stitching effect. And it actually looks pretty good when you turn the garment inside out as well, because the bobbin gives it this kind of strange ripply effect. So I kind of like to call it reverse embroidery. And because it's only got one trim, it is super efficient on your machine. And as you can see, it does a pretty good job on the photo as well, and I'm hoping that you can recognize who this person is. And it can be used for anything. So this is a photo of a dog that we use to create a Reef Photo Stitch, and a photo of a girl. So let's see it in action. I'll start a brand new window, and the first thing I'll do is I'll import my graphic, and I've got this Japanese black pine bonsai, and I bring that in, and then I grab Photo Stitch, Reef Photo Stitch. Now it's available under the auto digitizing toolbar along with Photo Flash, Color Photo Stitch and Reef Photo Stitch. Now when you select it, you get a dialog box to make a bunch of choices. Now I find for best results you try to up the contrast a little bit and try to get rid of that kind of mid-gray tone. You want more black and white, because in the end it's really only two colors, the background of the fabric and the thread itself. So I like to kind of up the grayscale a little bit and try to see if I can get rid of some of that grayness. And then I try to bring some definition back in by maybe reducing the brightness a little bit and upping the contrast as well. And now I'm getting kind of that nice sharp image. Now you've also got a density control as well, which means it's kind of like less stitching or more stitching, and I like to have it a little bit higher, so I get the more denser stitching on the darker areas and more open stitching on the lighter areas. And then you can choose your color and you can preview it before you generate that stitching. And you know what, I'm pretty happy with that. I could probably up my gray contrast a little bit more and preview that again, and I might get a bit more sharper definition around the edge. So you can play around with all the settings any way you want till you get the result that you're looking for. And again, I find you get better results by kind of lowering the brightness and upping the contrast as well. Okay, so when I'm done, I click OK and I get rid of my design, my bitmap background, and there I've got my bonsai digitized for me. Now I can continue to add to that. So I can grab some text and put the word bonsai, and I might make that like an orange color look quite well. And I think Flares is a pretty good font, so we'll grab that there, increase the size a little bit, and I might just adjust the kerning because it always looks nice with a bit of spacing when you do certain type of words like bonsai. And I'll just even out that kerning a little bit, place it underneath, and copy that text, bring it down and change it to the word nursery, and I might bring that down to be about 10 mil maybe. And I can probably bring in that spacing a little bit more because I don't need such a big spacing. And there you go. Very quickly, I've got a nice silhouette style design, which would be great for a nursery jacket or a t-shirt or even a shopping bag. And that is using the brand new Reef Photo Stitch. Now, Reef Photo Stitch is available in EmbroideryStudio e4.5 as an element for both your decorating and designing level. Up next we have hand stitch effect. Now, computerized embroidery these days is pretty good. The spacing, the stitch length is all calculated perfectly, so you always get perfect stitching every time. But sometimes you don't want a design to look absolutely perfect. Sometimes you want it to look a little bit more organic, a little bit more natural, or a little bit more hand created. And that's where the hand stitch effect comes into play. Let's take a look at this example. On the left is my original design I created, which just has a nice open satin stitch, a stem stitch running down the side here, a run stitch sewing along here, and I've tried to make it look a little bit more natural by opening up the spacing, but it still looks perfect. If that was done by hand, it wouldn't be so perfect. And that's where the hand stitch effect comes into play. By selecting these objects and applying hand stitch, a number of things are happening to the object. First of all, with a fill type like satin, it randomizes the spacing so some are close and some are farther away to make it look a little bit more hand effect. It can also slightly modify the length, again to make it be not so perfect. And if I zoom in, and let's just backtrack a little bit, so I go back through my design, right about here. If I travel through, you can see, let's continue down a little bit further. As I come through stitch by stitch, it was a satin stitch, so it does a satin stitch and a back stitch and a satin stitch and a back stitch. But when I apply hand stitch effect, now and then it randomizes the density as well. So in this case it does 1 satin, 2 and 3, so it's done 3 lots of stitches to make it look a little thicker. Then back to a 1, another 3, 1, 1, 1, 3, 1, and another 3. And the end result is when it sews out, it again looks like it's random, open spacing, and a little bit more like it's been hand stitched. The same for the stem stitch, is slightly offset them and made them slightly thicker. And also for the run stitch, instead of it being a perfectly even spacing, which you can see by my penetration points here, it's randomized. Some are short, some are longer. Again, to give that hand stitch style effect. So let's see some of those settings in action. I've just got a input C satin object over here, and I'll just clone that so I've got another copy of that. And to apply my hand stitch effect, I just select the hand stitch effect icon. It will just apply the default settings. And if I right click and look at those settings, it's turned on hand stitch, and there's a couple of variations you can modify. First of all, there is your stitch roughness, and it gives you a length of 0, which is the exact same width that you had your stitches before, not changed, or a variation from 0 all the way up to 5. 5 greatly varying the length, and 2 and 3 roughly in the middle. So again, adding that kind of more random hand stitch effect as if it's been done by hand. You then have an angle control, and I'm just going to open up my satin stitch a little bit so that can be illustrated a little bit better by making it about 1 millimeter. And if I go back to my hand stitch effect, with my angle set to 0, It again maintains that nice, even spaced angle that you're used to computerized embroidery generating. But when you're doing it by hand, you're not so perfect with your angles. So again, I can increase the angle variation or roughness to be 1 a little bit, all the way up to 5, where it's really varied to the point where it even overlaps and backtracks on itself. Again, creating that kind of interesting hand stitch style effect. Then we have the stitch mass. This is where it either does a single stitch like satin, or does 3 times the stitch, 1, 2, 3, or 5 times the stitch, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, each of them being a little thicker. If I go back to 3, and the next choice is random. Set to 0, every single stitch will be done 3 times. If I increase the randomness up to 5, then maybe only every 10 or 20th stitch will be done 3 times, and the rest will be done single times in a random style effect. Again, to make it look a little bit thicker in some places, a little bit thinner in the other. And then we have what we like to call the lucky toss option. When you click on it, you say, well, you've got these settings. Because it's randomized, I can show different variants of the randomizing. I can show option 2 or option 3 or option 4 and move through, each of them being a little bit different by using these options and randomizing them again. But you can always go back to one of the ones that you liked before. So it's remembered these 10 variations of these random options and made them quickly available for you to use there. So how could that work in a practical sense with a logo or design? Well, I'll click over to my new screen, and I've got a design on screen that I'm trying to get that kind of vintage chalkboard style effect on. And I've done what I could do up until now, which is have a fill in the background with an open density, and I've opened up all my density of these objects to be a little bit more open to try to make them look a little bit more kind of random effect. But it's still kind of perfect, right? The spacing is perfect, the length is perfect, my runs are perfect. It doesn't have that kind of vintage edge that I'm hoping to get. So I'll take a copy of all these objects over here so we can compare the two. And while it's selected, I'm going to simply click on my hand stitch effect, and let's see if you can see what happens. Straight away, something has changed. If we zoom in and compare, first of all, the drink over here, again, nice perfect spacing, nice perfect length. And if I scroll across to my other drink, you see now it has been randomized. The angles are a little bit random, the length is a little bit random, the space is a little bit random, and it just looks that little bit more kind of vintage and hand done. If we go back and compare the lines outside of my bottle, which were again perfect and straight, if I was doing them by hand in a pencil, they would not be that perfect. And again, the hand stitch effect has randomized that length and the shape to make it be a little bit more of a wiggle. And that's what the random stitch effect can do to your design. So it can be instantly ticked on, and again with them selected you can randomize the length and the angle. So if I want that to be more angled, I can change it up to 5 and it becomes a little bit more less perfect. You've got control over those settings, but the end result is you get a much more natural, organic and hand stitch style effect embroidery. Now the great thing about hand stitch is that it is available free and standard in the designing level and available as an add-on element in your decorating level. Next, I'd like to introduce a brand new product that we've just released called Embroidery Connect. Embroidery Connect is a wireless networking device that connects directly to your machine via a USB cable that we provide. By connecting your Embroidery Connect device to your wireless network, you can send an embroidery design wirelessly from your EmbroideryStudio software. And to make it even easier, you can scan a barcode on your production worksheet and Embroidery Connect will send the design directly to your machine. The device contains an LED light panel that changes color based on the status of the device and providing an instant visual update for your machine operator. We've also made setting up the device easy using the all-new Embroidery Hub software that's available standard in all levels of EmbroideryStudio. Within Embroidery Hub, you set up a new device, configure your design queue, or set your device settings, such as sending it as a DST, TBF, or other file format. The device is also encrypted, ensuring your designs are protected from data interception or theft. Now, we've built Embroidery Connect to support all business types, whether you're a small business with one machine or a large factory with hundreds of machines. Embroidery Connect is a modern, sleek device and is small enough to fit almost anywhere on your embroidery machine. The advantages of Embroidery Connect for your business are clear. First of all, there's no expensive networking. No cabling, no wiring, it's all done through your standard wireless network. It will also help you reduce the wear and tear on your machine. Plugging a USB device in and out of your machine all day long will wear your USB port on your machine and could result in you having to replace a 1,000-pound controller. There's also no more running around your factory because everything is done wirelessly and is instant. But the greatest advantage of all is the right design every time. By using your barcode scanner and Embroidery Connect and scanning the barcode on your production worksheet, you're guaranteed your operator loads only the correct design to your machine. Now, if you own more than one EmbroideryStudio software, they will all automatically connect and network to the Embroidery Hub software. That means that when you set up your Embroidery Connect device in Embroidery Hub, that device will automatically appear in every single instance of your Embroidery Studio, meaning you can send a design to your embroidery machine from any Embroidery Studio software in your business. Embroidery Connect is a brand new Wi-Fi device released by Wilcom, and it's supported in the brand new EmbroideryStudio e4.5. It really will take the pain out of sending designs to your embroidery machine. Again, no more running around with USB sticks, no more complicated or expensive networking. And the best thing of all is it guarantees you send the right design to the right machine every time. Now, one of the great new improvements we made to EmbroideryStudio e4.2 is the home screen, which gives you quick access to areas of your Embroidery Studio software and to the design library, which we want to talk about in just a moment. Now, on your home screen when your software first loads, you get this nice home screen that not only shows you your most recent open designs for quick access, but we have this really useful news, community, and blog section on the side of your software. From the News tab, you can get the latest information from our product team, including lots of hints and tips on how to use the software. In this case, how to create organic hand stitch effects using the brand new hand stitch effect we just showed you, or how to use the motif outline and columns or motif as a stamp, plus a whole lot more. Directly from the community, you can get access to the latest post in the online community or post yourself to get a quick answer to a question you might have. And on the blog tab, you get access to the latest blog post from our product and marketing team, again sharing lots of tips with you on how to use embroidery software and get the most from it. But another great tip of our home screen is the tutorial section. If you're stuck on doing something, simply click over to your home screen, click on tutorials, and you can search for any topic or item that you want on your screen. So for example, if I'm interested in learning about team names, I can type in team names, press enter, and up will appear every video tutorial that we have about team names that you can click and watch directly in your software. Also, you've got your My Wilcom tab that tells you all about the software you're currently running today, what elements you've got enabled, and what additional add-on elements you can add to your Embroidery Studio experience. But what I want to touch on is the design library, which in my opinion is one of the most powerful parts of our software and possibly an underutilized gem in your business. So what's the biggest challenge we have as embroiderers? Well, it's storing and maintaining all of our embroidery designs. Over the years, we collect thousands and thousands of them. And we love return repeat business. It's easy for us to do. We have the logo set up. We just throw it on the machine and get more garments churned out, and we make more money. But finding those designs can be a bit challenging. You end up making custom folders for different designs and storing them all over the place, and they're really difficult to find unless you know the folder or the customer details. Well, this is where Design Library can really make it easier for you. So I've got thousands of designs and many different folders. And when you select the top level folder, Design Library will automatically filter through every single subfolder and show you all those designs in one list. So you're not having to click through each individual folder and explore them in one go. So while I'm at the top level of my embroidery folder, I can also search for my embroidery designs. Let's say one of my customers returned, such as Kennedy Grammar School, to get some more garments done. Well, without having to find a design number or plot number or customer folder, I can just search for Kennedy, press enter, and it will instantly search all my subfolders of my embroidery folder and locate any design that mentions the word Kennedy. Now when I select that design and open it up, I get full access to that design. And how was I able to quickly search for that design by the term Kennedy? Well, that comes over to this information tab, design information tab, that I recommend you use for every single one of your designs that you create. When you click on the information icon, you click over to your design information screen and you have a bunch of tabs like the summary, design, thread colors, stitching, runtime, but also you have this order tab. And the order tab is where you can store all the information related to the order or the customer you're doing for this design. You can give it a design title, in this case Kennedy Grammar School chest. You can also update the design status. Is it in production? Is it waiting for approval? Has it been sent to the customer for their approval? You can include the order number, select the customer's contact details, maybe their reference number, the sales rep in your organization who took that job, and including whether that's designed for a polo shirt and a left chest, and the quantity and the exact product you're doing it on, and the product color. And you can even also set up a color, size, and quantity matrix. So for example, we might be doing it on size small and size medium and size large. And then I can set up my colors, and it could be a white garment, and I might also be doing it on a black garment. And then I can set up each quantity by color and size. So 5, 15, 6, 10, 5, and 12. And that's kept as a permanent record, plus any notes you need to make against that particular design. Now when I save that away, it's saved back in my folder, and if I go back to Design Library, all that information is easily accessible on my screen. I open up my details pane, and when I select it, I can see the details of the design, or I can open up my information tab and I get the exact same details that I entered before, which is all completely searchable. So let's say, for example, your customer calls you and the only thing they've got on record was their original purchase order number, PO1234. I'll copy that out so I've got a reference of that, and I'll clear my search. Again, if you stored that against that embroidery design or that record, you can simply open up your design library, select on screen, type in that PO number, PO1234, and live Design Library will search through all your embroidery designs and locate any design that has that as the purchase order or reference number. But beyond actually searching for your designs in Design Library, you also have a lot of other capability. You can of course copy a design. You can select a whole bunch of embroidery designs and mass convert them to a stitch type like a DST. You can send them directly to your machine, or you can print them, or build them into a catalog, or export it as a CSV design list for any other form of database or referencing you want to do. So Design Library is a really useful tool that collects all that information you add to your Order tab and your Design tab and makes it easily searchable across your embroidery designs. Now the great thing about it is there's no database setup required. You don't have to install any clunky SQL and set up network permissions. It simply looks at the embroidery designs in the folder and pulls out all that design information that you've already saved inside and make it easily searchable and easily accessible by your team. Now the greatest thing about Design Library is it is available standard in all levels of EmbroideryStudio e4.5. Now we're going to talk about the all-new beading in Wilcom EmbroideryStudio e4.5. Now beading is a brand new decoration method that we've introduced to Embroidery Studio to complement our ordinary embroidery plus sequin capability. Now, very similar to sequin, we've given you the ability to set up a beading palette that lets you define not only the shape of the bead, but also the color and also the size of the bead as well. And as you can see in my bead palette, I have 4 different beads configured for my beading design. Now we have various methods of using beads in our software. The first one is the bead auto run, that when selected, I can just simply do a shape on screen and it will create my beading design. And in this case, it's placing a bead every 12 millimeters along my design, which is exactly the spacing I have here. Or I can change it down to 4, and now it's specifying it every 4 millimeters. So that's the beading auto run. And of course, we have the bead manual run, that it will only place a bead everywhere that I place my mouse click. And again, along each of those clicks, it has placed an individual bead. Now let's go back to my first beading object, this one that I've created here. With this beading object, I have a laydown bead that is sewing along and dropping a bead along that design line. So dropping a bead, dropping a bead, dropping a bead, and sewing it down along my path as such. And again, if I select that bead object, I can change the spacing, make it be 3 millimeters, for example. And I even have a choice of the type of bead I want it to be, either bead A, B, C, or the D style bead. Again, the exact same beads that I've configured here inside my bead palette. Let's take this back to A. Now, in addition to this laydown bead fixing method that is sewing along the bead line of my bead object, I can select from a collection of different fix down stitches that we have built into the software. So here we have the classic laydown bead, or the second bead fixing stitch. And I can increase my width a little bit to space that out. Or I have a decorative fixing stitch, such as this method here, which creates a very decorative pattern along the edge of my bead. Or this method here, or this method, or this method. And each of these fixing stitches are a decorative style of bead fixing. So not just a standard plain flat, but very decorative fixing methods to create really decorative designs on your machine. Now, if we look at this particular bead fixing pattern, we can start along here and we can see that this spacing is set to 4 millimeters. So every 4 millimeters, we're placing down a new bead evenly along the line. And that comes to be a bit of a problem though. When we come around the corner, this part here looks okay. It's a nice even spacing. But as we come down here and start to turn into the corner, we can see that that 4 mil spacing is creating a bunched set of beads along here which are running into each other. So we have some settings to control that. And at the moment, I have my spacing set to be along the baseline, which means every 4 millimeters along the baseline, it is dropping a single bead. If I change this to be between the shape and then set my spacing to be 1 millimeter between each shape, it is now evenly spacing my beads, that on the closed corner, each bead is 1 millimeter spacing away from each other, 1 millimeter, 1 millimeter, 1 millimeter. And when we come around the corner, at this point, it is still 1 millimeter along here. And then on the inner curve, it jumps over to here. And now this spacing is evenly 1 millimeter spacing. And then on the opposite curve, it flips back and it goes from 1 millimeter over here, 1 millimeter, 1 millimeter, 1 millimeter along the entire line, giving you a clean visual representation of that spacing. Now, in addition to this single bead along my pattern, I can add a second bead and make it B, a third bead and make it C, and a fourth bead and make it D. Not only do I have to have the bead be different, but each bead can have a different fixing stitch. The first bead can maybe be a round fixing stitch. The second bead could be the pattern bead, and the third fixing stitch could be, let's just say, number 4, standing out on the side. So every single bead along my pattern can have a unique fixing stitch, really opening up the creative capabilities that you can do with our brand new beading feature. Now, in addition to the automatic beading run that you see me do here on screen, I can also manually create beading designs as well using the manual bead tool. Now, with the manual bead tool, you can digitize your designs just like you would on screen manually, creating a stitch, dropping a bead, stitch, stitch, drop bead, stitch, stitch, drop bead, and stitch. And as you go along, it will create that beading design for you. You can even force it to do a lay down bead by sewing along, sewing, drop the bead, sew back, and continue. And now it creates a lay down bead. So you're free to create any type of bead design you want. Sew back, and continue. And it will create all the designs and styles that you want as if you're designing it manually on screen using the bead tool. And also, while you digitize along, you can change what bead you want to do by pressing the tab key and drop bead, and drop bead. And again, it will create each one of those designs and manually drop the bead as you want it to do on screen. Now, the beading feature is available as an add-on element for your EmbroideryStudio e4.5 and can be used in addition to your standard embroidery and sequin capabilities. Next, I'd like to talk about our brand new feature, which is the support for complex text. Now, complex text characters or lettering are from languages such as Arabic or Thai, where they contain characters that connect in a complex way. All you need is EmbroideryStudio e4.5.1 plus a true type font on your computer in the language or character set that you wish to support. Then simply type your lettering and generate it on screen. Now, in the case of Arabic, where it writes from right to left, EmbroideryStudio will also support that. To ensure that you have the sewing sequence that you require for your particular language or character set. Now, the great thing about this new feature is that it's standard in all levels of EmbroideryStudio, from our lettering all the way up to our top digitizing level. Well, this concludes our formal webinar presentation on EmbroideryStudio e4.5. I hope you'll agree that we've made some significant improvements to your Embroidery Studio experience. Now, if you are an E4, E4.1 or an E4.2 user, you can download e4.5 for free today from our help website at help.wilcom.com. Or if you'd like to update to e4.5 from E3, E2 or below, then contact our sales team by the details on screen. We'll hang around for the next few minutes and answer some of your questions. But finally, please allow us to thank you for your time, and we hope you enjoyed our webinar. Goodbye.